Welcome back to the conversation. It is your host, Adrienne Lawrence, and this time I am joined by the founder and CEO of Translash. That is Imara Jones. Thanks so much for joining us, Imara.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, so I know there are a lot of conversations going on in Congress right now, especially with yesterday seeing the Senate pass this focus on marriage equality and ensuring that interracial marriages are okay. But can you tell me why they should be focusing more on embracing members of the queer community and ensuring that individual civil rights are protected?
Because we've seen that the attempt to focus on gay marriage really hasn't worked. That's because since the passage of gay marriage, the attacks on our community have broken records year on year and have ended up in terrible acts of mass violence, as we saw during Club Q. And we know that a lot of these attacks are actually fueled by a permission structure, which gives people the idea that it's okay to attack our community because we are somehow less than and have less human rights. And that's not something that they've made up. They have politicians that are communicating that through the hundreds of anti-trans bills. There's an entire infrastructure in the media ecosystem of the right wing also amplifying that. And there's an entire online conversation on the dark corners of the internet further amplifying all of that still. And so what's actually needed in this moment is a declaration that's full-throated of the full human rights of trans people in our country at this moment. And the best legislative vehicle for that is the Equality Act. So what we need is the Equality Act and not marriage, because marriage has fallen short of the mark in terms of helping to protect our community in really key ways.
Absolutely. And definitely that marriage, ensuring that it is preserved to some extent, is just upholding some of the tenets on which our nation was founded that excludes others and isn't fully inclusive. And what's the point of having legislation out there if the act itself is simply going to be impotent because people still engage in those forms of hate, as we've seen with the Civil Rights Act we passed years ago, yet we still have the same problems every day. I know that you're an anti-trans hate machine expert. And so if you could talk a little bit about why there needs to be more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's really important is that the anti-trans hate machine is the shorthand description for the entire ecosystem that I have described, the machine that I've described, which encompasses politicians and billionaires and nonprofit groups and a media infrastructure and an extreme religious ideology, which together has seized control of the Republican Party. And that seizure of control has given it a political life. And we need to understand that the anti-trans movement in this country that has embedded itself at the heart of the Republican Party, is not by accident, it's by design. And it's a full part of the entire political project of the GOP. Focusing on trans people is a key pillar of their entire movement, and actually one of the ways that they hold themselves together. And so we need greater protections for trans people because Democrats will not be in power forever. And there needs to be, as again, a full-throated declaration and some laws on the books which begin to protect trans people. Project Always was an enterprise of relatively a small number of people in the LGBTQ plus community, but there was a promise inherently made in the rallying around marriage that once marriage was done, then there would be an expansion in the fight for the rest of the things that are really important to our community. And that never materialized. And that's why if we just stop in marriage now, that we're not going to get very far and that we will continue to empower the anti-trans hate machine.
Yes, and it's something that seems to be fired up very much so in Texas, Florida, and a number of other states as they attack children being able to have access and undermine children's knowledge in terms of their own gender identity and who they are. And it seems to be some extent conflated oftentimes when people think, this Marriage Equality Act uplifts the LGBT community, but that T is still something that is not uplifted and if oftentimes is torn down and definitely not benefiting from the supports that are provided to the L and the G. So
yeah, I think given the fact that the anti-trans movement is a key pillar of the political enterprise of the Republican Party right now, the fact that you have 10 Republicans voting for this bill, to me, is a signal that we should be worried. And the reason why is because I think that what they can do in this is to say that as they up the attacks on our community, that they're not actually anti-LGBTQ, even though they're being specifically anti-trans. That this is going to give them, a pass on the part of many to be able to up the attacks on our community and to feel comfortable with that and to sleep at night and to go to their donors in their base and to make that case. And so again, I don't think that we should be too sanguine. We shouldn't be too ecstatic about this gay marriage bill. I think that there are a lot of problems, and a part of it is, as you say, to continue to isolate the T from the rest of the alphabet. And that's actually been done in Great Britain to the detriment of trans people, where trans rights, which were on the verge of being codified in the law there, have been rolled back in part by this isolation of trans people from the rest of the queer community.
Wow, do you think that that isolation in terms of being able to identify issues that specifically impact and often more frequently impact trans people, that does a disservice to protecting trans lives that I would argue need protection in ways that other members of the alphabet don't necessarily need?
Well, I think it does a disservice to the rest of our community because it gives the rest of the community a false sense of security. And it also means that the important issues that they also care about that would be covered by the Equality Act, like equal access to every area of American life, which currently does not exist, would come about, but that's delayed through the isolation of trans people. And I think that one of the things that we need to realize is that this is always, just a way to try to isolate our community and divide and undermine our community. And if people stop again at gay marriage, it's just going to further that division and undermining of our rights.
Absolutely. And yes, that's an absolute poignant observation in terms of giving people a false sense of security. And something I also might see become a consequence is this thought that where lesbian and gay people might think, oh, well, I'm taken care of, I'm fine, and thus forget their trans brothers, sisters, and others. Is that something that also concerns you?
Yeah, I think it sets up for broader attacks against trans people because it makes people feel that as long as you're not trans, you're okay, you're accepted by society. And so don't rock the boat, don't make too much noise as we continue to target the most marginalized of the marginalized. And we have to understand that trans people are a key part of our community. We saw that at Club Q, where 2 out of the 5 victims murdered that night are trans. So this idea that we can somehow isolate and turn our backs on trans people and be okay, that's just not the way that it's working out or going to work out, but again, gives a false sense of security. And we saw that. We saw large numbers of gay people, and specifically, white gay men, walk away from the LGBTQ movement after the passage of gay marriage from this false sense of security. And so this, again, is just a way to divide and undermine. And we should be very circumspect of things that in this day and age, when it comes to an issue like LGBTQ rights, when you see this many Republicans supporting it, should think twice about why exactly it's garnering so much support right now. Because it's not because the party supports LGBTQ+ people. There's plenty of evidence over 3 decades to suggest otherwise.
Absolutely, something is insidious going on if the Republicans and the GOP are uplifting people who are generally not like them, shall we say, as we know how they love otherness. And so in terms of what do you think people can do immediately, what do you think?
Well, I think that one of the most important things is to, this sounds like old fashioned, but it really does matter, is to reach out to your members of Congress and to make your voices heard in terms of the fact that these are important issues and that you want them moved. And I would suggest calling, not emailing, because believe it or not, phone calls to congressional offices have a lot more weight than do emails or any other form of electronic communication. They're still a little bit analog. The other thing that I think that people really need to do is when it comes to protecting trans people through legislation to really focus on your local races, pay attention to your state legislative races, make your voices heard also in those state legislative races, and to those new state legislators that are going to be coming to power, because they're going to be figuring out what side of the issue that they should be on, and you should let them know that they should be on the side that you think is right. And I think that we don't pay attention. We don't think, we've been convinced that making our voices heard actually doesn't matter. But the fact that people spend so much time telling you that it doesn't, like voting, tells you that the opposite probably is true.
Absolutely. And I know we have just about a minute or so left, but I'd love to hear what led you to found Translash Media, excuse me.
Yeah, it was what led me to found Translash is exactly what we're talking about. That is to say, the terrible attacks that were on our community and the centrality of the need to tell trans stories to save trans lives in terms of letting people know who we really are, and the challenges that we face to center our humanity so that more people open their hearts to us and are less inclined to attack us and support those who do. So that's what led me to found Translash Media.
That's fantastic. So it's inspiring at the same time as it is disappointing, the efforts and hoops we all have to jump through for people to see our humanity. But I very, very much appreciate the work that you do and uplifting the message. And so thank you so much. And if people want to follow you or learn more about you, where should they go?
They should go to either Translash Media or any of my handles, which are just my name. It's super easy.
Very nice. That's Imara Jones, founder and CEO of Translash Media, which is at www.translash.org.